If you guys are ready to ditch the iPhone or ditch the Android and make some videos with a camera like this video is for you. I'm gonna show you the 5 basic things you need to know when picking up any camera like this one. The 5 things I wanna review are ISO, aperture or f-stop, frame rate, shutter speed, and white balance. Don't let people scare you away. The cameras are super easy to run. Let's get right into it. The first setting is ISO. Essentially, you just want ISO as low as possible. You are going to need the ISO turned up a bit, especially if you're in a dark room, you're gonna need to bring up the ISO. The higher the ISO number is, the more grain you're gonna get in your video, and it's gonna look like garbage if you go too high with it. So you want the ISO super low. The next setting you need to understand to run a camera like this one instead of your iPhone is aperture or f-stop. Your camera will have an F on the bottom corner, and that is your f-stop. Now, the lower the number, the more blurry it's gonna be behind you, and your subject is gonna be in focus. If you crank the aperture up, everything's gonna be in focus. So right now, my f-stop that you're watching right now is at 2.8. It's the lowest that it can go with the lens that I have and the camera that I have. Personally, I like the background real blurry and the subject in focus, so I try to shoot with the aperture real low as well. Now, the higher the f-stop, your image is also going to get darker. So if you're outside, you are gonna have to crank that f-stop up because it's super bright outside. It's getting too much light into the lens and just completely washing everything out. You are gonna have to increase that. You can get an ND filter for your lens so that way you can keep the f-stop real low when you're outside, but I don't wanna confuse you, that's advanced stuff. All you need to know is f-stop. If it's super high, it's gonna be really dark. If it's super low, it's gonna be brighter. I'm shooting on an FX3, the one in my hand is a GH5. They're all pretty similar. You are gonna have f-stop. I know I'm breezing through this, but like I said, you don't need a college degree for this, and it's super simple stuff, and I just wanna simplify it as best as possible. If you're advanced in video, this video is not for you. So let's go over the frame rate. A frame rate that you're seeing right now is in 24 frames per second. If you're watching the news, it's in 29 frames per second generally. And then if you're filming slow motion, it's in 60 frames per second. Don't think just because you have more frames per second that you get a better quality image. It's just not simply the case. If you want your video to look like this, look more cinematic in a way, shoot at 23.976 frames per second, your camera might say 24. That's the number that you want to be at. Also, if you don't have a real good lens and you're shooting at 60 frames per second, your image is also going to get much more dark. That's the last thing you want, especially if it's already dark in the room that you're filming in. Let's say you were filming a wedding video and you wanted your video to be more elegant. Maybe a guy's putting a suit jacket on, but you don't want it in real slow motion. Sure, then you can film at 29 frames per second, but when you are putting it in something like Premiere Pro, an editing program, you would need to interpret that footage and put it on a 24 frames per second timeline. It's really easy. If you want to learn how to edit your videos, it's not that difficult. All I had to do was YouTube. How do I make a cut? How do I do this? How do I first start my Premiere Pro project? It's super easy, and there's a million tutorials on YouTube. If you were filming a car drifting or you wanted some actual slow-mo, then you will film at 60 frames per second. Your camera might say 59.99 frames per second or something of that sort. The reason I'm hitting on all 3 of these different frame rates instead of just saying film at 24, your video is going to look like this and you're good to go, is because the next one is shutter speed. Shutter speed's super easy. Don't let this scare you. All you need to do is have shutter speed double your frame rate. If you're framing in 23.976 frames per second, you want to double it. It should say something like 1/50. 50 is pretty close to double the 24 frames per second, so that's what you would put that as. If you're filming in 60 frames per second because you want it slow-mo, your shutter speed then has to be at 120 or 1/120. If you have just a number and you don't have 1 over something, make that number 180. That number will then consistently be double the frame rate, whether you're filming in 24 frames per second, 29 or 60, 180 will always be double the frame rate. On this Lumix GH5, it does that. It says 180. I think I can change it on this FX3. It's a Sony camera that I'm using. Right now on the top of it, it says 24 frames per second is what I'm shooting in, and it says 1/50 as my shutter speed. Hopefully I didn't confuse you guys with those first 4. The last one is white balance. I want to talk about white balance for a second. If you have auto white balance, a lot of the new cameras these days do a really good job with their auto white balance. For me, if I'm filming in our studio, I'll turn it to the sun. You might see a sun or it's a daylight. That is a really good setting. It actually makes me look a little more tan than I am. I like that. Think of it as like an Instagram filter. You're putting a very faint Instagram filter over the picture. When you push record, that entire video clip is going to have a tinted color to it. Don't get carried away with the white balance. Keep it on auto or keep it on something very simple. Last thing you want is something to look real blue or real green. I really hope this video helps you. Again, this is not rocket science. Just because some people are getting paid a lot of money to make videos doesn't mean you can't do it as well. Video is going to dramatically benefit you or maybe the business that you're working for. You're going to see numbers that you've never seen before if you haven't been making videos. Remember, we are in a content race. That means the more content you put out there, the better you are doing. Please subscribe and we'll see you guys again in the next video.